everybody. I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10 Foot Pole, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 12. Today, our guest is Pastor Kirsten and I, who is the Associate Pastor for Outreach and Campus Ministry at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Hello.
That's exciting.
Hi. Yeah.
You have a really fun title.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a fun title. I get to work with campus ministry students from all around Raleigh, North Carolina. Primarily, our students currently are at NC State, go Wolfpack, Meredith College, and Wake Tech Community College.
Cool. That sounds fun. I mean, I have a soft spot for campus ministries. I also didn't really do this on purpose, but I have back-to-back kind of campus ministry people. The previous two guests are ELCA colleges, so they're
nice.
Not really the same, but
no,
those nice cushy jobs at church schools.
Right. Yeah, our student. I think NC State's probably a little bit bigger than the ELCA colleges, but. They're all awesome.
Well, I just wanted, to say for listeners that may not know the difference, right? So there are ELCA colleges, so there are Lutheran schools, and they have, as a part of the staff of the school, is a campus pastor person. And then there's campus ministries, which are independent ministries that are affiliated with public or other non-ELCA private schools. I once upon a time was at the Lutheran Student Center at the University of Northern Iowa. So it's a public school. We're just an affiliate ministry. And they function totally differently than the ELCA college campus ministry situations, all the way up through the different departments that they're responsible for them in the ELCA. It's kind of weird just how kind of different that they're all treated. But anyways. For people who do close to the same thing.
Oh, yeah. We all work with students. Oftentimes there are campus ministries that are like the Lutheran Episcopal campus ministry. So They work with other denominations. Sometimes there are, for example, my position, we work with a bunch of different colleges and universities instead of just one. I should specify NC State, North Carolina State University, in case folks are confused.
I said that you were in Raleigh, North Carolina, so
yeah, there you go. Folks can infer where I'm actually located and what school it is.
Yeah, they may not care either. Tough to say.
Yes.
Exactly. Anyways, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
So we get to talk about the last Sunday before Lent starts. So for those that may be unfamiliar with the church year, so the church year, I know we've mentioned this before, but the church year starts right after Thanksgiving with Advent. And so you have the season of Advent, which leads up to Christmas, and then you have the season of Christmas, and then you have the season of Epiphany. It's really called Time After Epiphany. And then that kind of ends with this Sunday called Transfiguration. And then what comes after this is Ash Wednesday, which starts our season of Lent, which ends with Jesus's death and resurrection and Easter. And then we have the season after Easter, and that goes all the way until Pentecost. And we've talked about Pentecost. Please go back to listen to season 1, episode 5, and then the other one with Andrew Burdahl. Listen to those 2 episodes. And then we have the time after Pentecost all the way until we get back to Advent again. That's what most of the year is. Anyways, so this is our last thing that happens before we start our time of Lent and our journey with Jesus towards the cross. We have this transfiguration moment. And so I'm going to read the gospel lesson. If you're a church-going person and you're planning on being at church on Sunday, February 19th, in a church that follows a revised common lectionary, you're going to hear this. Matthew chapter 17, verses 1-9. And I'm going to read the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became bright as light. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will set up 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Get up and do not be afraid. And when they raised their eyes, they saw no one except for Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, Do not tell anyone about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, or the first thing that pops up out of my head reading this right now, at least, is where are we? In verse 5, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. That's got to be scary to have, a cloud and all of a sudden this voice coming from the cloud. I think we all sort of joke around about, God was speaking from the cockpit of the airplane or from wherever, but to have, this happen in your life, can't say the first reaction would be comfort and joy, but terror and
right. Of course, they're terrified.
Right.
I always get the vibe of like, this is, to me, it's Mufasa speaking from the clouds to Simba, right? Like that's what remember who you are. Which is also why that voice to me, like that's the one that I personify as God often.
It's funny you say that. That is exactly who I think of as a godlike figure, is Mufasa. And I remember thinking that in college, or not college, way back in high school. That was who I thought of as God. I think for a lot of people, that would be really comforting. Maybe people of our generation who...
Yeah, right. People that grew up with that as young kids, for sure. Which I'm just gonna, on the converse side, though, it could be a little challenging because that's the same voice of Darth Vader.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, try not to think about it necessarily in that way.
You bring up a good point with the disciples, though. So my joke, and I post this meme almost every year for Transfiguration because I'm a church nerd, is the one from Talladega Nights of Ricky Bobby trying to do this interview in his hands, and he keeps going, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like, to me, that's the disciples in this moment. They're so either like nervous or like, just try to keep it cool, guys, like being in the presence of all of this, that they just like, they don't know what to do, right? And so Peter's like, oh man, I mean, could we set you up some tents? Would that be helpful? Is that a thing that we can do to be helpful for you guys? That like one for each of you, you'd each have your own tents. Like this is good thing we're here. Like, who would set up your tents for you? Like this is our job. So this is we can start a fire. Is that helpful? Do you want us to go get some food? Or are we gonna hang out a while? Do you need a little bit? Not, we can, this is how I envision the disciples in this moment. Being in this total like awe of majesty of, these are who Jesus is meeting with. Which I also feel like he had to tell them who that was, or else how would they know?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'd be curious to hear from the disciples, if they didn't know that was God, who did they think that was?
The voice?
Yeah, the voice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when they looked up and they saw 2 other people standing with Jesus, how did they know that was Moses and Elijah? Like, clearly someone had to tell them that. Because to them, they're just staring at like 2, are they ghosts? I'm not sure.
Yeah, what was their concept? And if they were
Jesus, who are you talking to?
Right. Who is that person? Who is that other person? What did
there's
they do?
there's some things that I think are not listed in the text. Like, we're missing a few verses in there. And, Jesus leaned over and whispered, hey guys, this is Moses and Elijah. Like, anyways. Those are things I like to add. Yeah, add a little bit more meat to the story.
Right, exactly.
These aren't really in-depth novels like I need them to be sometimes.
Yeah, and it's interesting how when you get a text, you put your own, I mean, everyone does, you put your own interpretation and background story into who you think is involved and who are the other players in that. Thinking about the voice and the cloud in general, hearing "get up and do not be afraid." That's interesting to think about. Were they really, I'm sure they did get up, but how are they not afraid? That's, I think of, when someone's anxious or really worked up and they hear calm down.
Right? Yeah.
I don't think in the history of calming down anyone has ever calmed down. When you hear calm down, it's almost like the opposite of,
oh yeah, it makes me instantly angry. Yeah.
Right.
Calm down, AJ. Okay, I'll show you calm down.
Don't tell me what to do.
Don't tell me what to do. Exactly. See, now that is particular. That's verse 7.5. They left that one out where the disciple said, Jesus, don't tell me to calm down.
Right. What were the other background conversations that the folks were having with Jesus that didn't make it into the Bible text that we hear every year? Yeah.
And a lot of things that, may really, may not have been very important. But I think also, for us as we continually, learn about Jesus and read the Gospels, I think most people put themselves in sort of the disciples' shoes when they read these different stories. And so for me to kind of hear that, if we're putting ourselves in these shoes, what are these other pieces, right? Like, what did that look like? Just fun stuff.
Yeah.
But Transfiguration, this is, many people are like, oh yeah, that's what Professor McGonagall teaches. You're very close. That's almost what happened to Jesus. They are related.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so it's, it's to be transformed, to be changed. So the word here in Greek for transfigure is metamorpho, which is where we get, metamorphosis and, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Those are both things that that relate here. So this is, when we hear Jesus is sort of transfigured, that I don't know. I feel like that's a really weird thing to say. Like, if you're like, for those of us that grew up in the church and we're used to this every Sunday, we're like, yeah, Transfiguration Sunday, but to other people, they're like, wait, what? I don't understand. Did Jesus turn into a Power Ranger? What's happening here? What do you mean he was transfigured? What did he turn into? Was it like into a teacup? What are we talking here? And so we get this different sort of language. So this story is recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, meaning Matthew, Mark, and Luke. As we know, John wrote their own story about the life of Jesus that mostly has nothing to do with the other three stories. So we do have it recorded in all the Synoptic Gospels, and both Matthew and Mark use this term metamorpho. Luke doesn't. Luke does not use this metamorpho, does not actually use the word transfigure at all, or transform, which is how this word in all the other stories except here, well, it's only used 2 more times in the Bible, it's used the word transform. But about Jesus specifically, both of these, the gospel translators wrote transfigure instead of transform. My guess is to set them apart a little bit with it being Jesus. But anyways, Luke doesn't use that. Luke just says his face was changed, which is not different, right? Like, that's essentially what happened. Like, he has changed, he has transformed, something about his face changed. But we don't actually get told like of what, his face was shown like the sun. Okay, so it was really bright. Did he turn into a flashlight? Is that what he's transfigured into? Like, what do we mean here? That like, or is it just like glowing, like somebody put glow paint on his face? Could you imagine like glow in the dark makeup? That's probably totally a thing. There's Halloween, AJ. Like, is it more like, what are we talking about? I don't know. We don't know. We just know that he was transformed. And I think that's probably more the key takeaway, right? That we talk about Jesus's transformation in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So this word metamorpho is only used 2 more times in the Bible. In Romans 12:2, which is do not conform to this world, but be transformed by God. And in 2 Corinthians, be transformed into the Lord's own image.
Mm.
So those are our 2 other instances of this same word. Other than that, this is
it.
This is it, right? And so I love the relational pieces of those two, those two letters from Paul, kind of using the same language here of this, you're being transformed by God.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to think about. So you have the word transfigure, and it's Jesus's face being changed in some way, shape, or form. Did he turn into I was going to say a dinosaur, not a dinosaur, a Power Rangers, or I think of like the Animorphs books that my brother had, growing up. But then when I think about the other texts, the only other 2 texts that this word is used in, I think of more of like an internal transformation.
Yeah, yes.
Physical one. Or when, you hear people say like, I was changed by this sermon, or I was changed by the word of God. Usually it's not like, your Mr. Potato Head where your eyeballs are now down by your face. It's, something inside of me changed that is not a physical change that can, be morphed or changed in some way by surgery, but a feeling or an emotion or a thought process that I thought about it, a person's identity this way, and now I think about it in another way because of the gospel text or, how I saw someone treating me. Yeah, just thinking about the word transformation is so fascinating.
Well, you bring up a good point. So the transform that's in Romans is the version of metamorpho. The verb here is one that it's a verb. It is an active, like it's an active verb, but it's passive, meaning it's being done to the person. So a more accurate translation of this is that you do not be conformed to this world, but you are being continually transformed by God. That it's a continual ongoing thing. That's in Romans anyways, but just that what that means, that form of the verb is, that what you're saying here is like you're always continually having these little transformations, or like daily transformations even.
Absolutely. Yeah, to think of yourself, and particularly in a faith lens, like you as the 5-year-old AJ is not the same as the 25-year-old AJ in your faith journey, or your interpretation of the gospel.
Yeah,
most of us, I would argue, didn't even know what half of this stuff meant when you were 5 years old, but it means
I hope I didn't know what happened. I actually, it's like sometimes I still don't know if I think I know what half of this stuff means.
Yeah, even as 2 people who have graduated from seminary and taken numerous Bible classes, I don't begin to understand a lot of it. And that's, thankfully, that's the beauty of.
I can say that might be a transformation right there, to get to a point where you can say, hey, I know that I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, yes.
And I actually think that that's an amazing place to get to in anyone's faith, right? To be able to rely on God and to have a relationship saying, you know what, I don't know. This is what I've experienced to be true, and this is what I believe in my relationship, but I don't know, right? Like there's no, that's an okay place to be.
Absolutely.
A healthy pace, if anything.
Yeah. One of a concept that was brought up to me by a friend on internship, she was at my internship congregation. She said there's a thick faith and a thin faith. The thin faith is, well, I do it because the Bible told me to do it. I do it because a spiritual or religious leader told me to do it. So I'm just going to almost blindly follow that path. Whereas a thick faith, from my understanding, and again, people have different interpretations of it, is I'm going to question and wrestle. And is this actually what the Bible said, or is it something else? And, like you said, that's what faith faith is, you know, hoping and praying and relying on a being that will have your back no matter what, even when you're completely confused and scared, and which I would argue a lot of us are scared and confused a lot of
Yeah.
times, and that's why we do go to church.
I also think that there's a lot of things that people have believed because it became, I think, mainstream to assume that that's what the Bible says, like that's what that means in the Bible, which may not be necessarily true. It's just that idea has taken cultural root.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of an example, and my brain is
Well,
not functioning on all cylinders.
the first thing that comes to mind is when we were at Raleigh's Pride Festival out Raleigh, and the concept of, you know, folks identifying as LGBTQ, and I, you know, wearing a collar there and a shirt that says "This pastor loves you," and standing in front of the what I call sort of bullhorn evangelicals saying like God hates, pick whatever ugly word you want to use, and them, you know, coming up to me and saying, well, in the Bible it says, you know, man shall not lie with man, or blah blah blah, and in them saying like, do you know the Bible? And my response is, yes, I went to seminary. And them responding again to me, well, it clearly didn't do any good. Of course, the conversation was then ended, but it's like, this is an interpretation. This is someone's interpretation.
Like, actually, quite the opposite. I went to seminary and learned a lot more about the context and the audience and the speakers, and learned what was happening in their community, and learned what the actual Hebrew words there that are being used and what they meant in those contexts and why.
Right, exactly.
Like,
someone,
but you can't get that across to someone who has that kind of thin faith. That's a really good example. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, someone, to use our word of the day, transfigured this text into different languages. You know, this, contrary to a lot of especially American belief, the Bible was not originally written in English. It was
no, the King James version of the Bible is the original Bible. You didn't know that?
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, please, actually, if anyone's interested in learning more about the King James Bible, go to the episode from season 1 about queer theology with Pastor Chris Schaefer, and you can learn more about King James and the King James Bible, and some fun queer knowledge about it. Okay.
Nice little plug there.
I have to.
Yeah.
Well, I also I want to, so my thing is for especially faithful podcast listeners, I want to be able to talk about new things. I don't want to talk about the same thing all the time, because, you know, then you're like, AJ, why the hell are we talking about the same thing every week? So right. I want to acknowledge these things, say we have talked about it, and point you to where you can listen to more.
Exactly.
In your resources.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're going to keep building on it, because we can keep doing this for seasons and seasons and seasons. And there's so many things that are happening in the Bible that, you know, for us to unpack and to talk about, that I don't think we'll get bored with not having to repeat ourselves.
No, I don't think so.
But this is, this Transfiguration text, I find just fascinating, because I think actually it's kind of a confusing thing.
Absolutely. I would agree.
And I say that also from I say that from a perspective of a kind of a scholarly, looking at everything from like a macro lens of where this story fits into the Gospels, what's happening, and then what does it tell us, right? So everything, when we read the stories that are included about Jesus, because I like to give it that like, you know, there's a lot that happened. There's so many stories and encounters that people did have of you know, this person. These were just the ones that they felt like writing down. And the fact that it was, you know, recorded 3 different times means that this was important. So what is it important for us to learn about Jesus? And I actually think a key to that is in the Luke's version. So the Luke version of this does give one of those, you know, 7.5 detailed sentences that we don't hear in the others. And
Mhm.
we actually get a little context. So it says when, he's speaking to Moses and Elijah, we hear that they are speaking to Jesus about Jesus's exodus,
Mm.
aka his crucifixion, or his departure, as an exodus is a departure or going out. That's what they're talking to Jesus about.
Mhm.
And so to me, that alludes to like, man, I want to learn more about this conversation. Like, did they come down? So Jesus went up there to pray. In the midst of his prayers, what is Jesus praying about? That these two figures who have had their own, going out of some sort, to come back. And are they sort of beckoning Jesus back home with them? Are they giving him words of encouragement? Or
Mhm.
are they just kind of some messengers that they're telling him what he needs to do?
Mhm. Yeah,
Those
no,
are
that's
those are just my speculations about what this potential conversation is about.
I think one of the best features, if you will, of this text is it shows Jesus's humanity, which I think is often forgotten. Yes, Jesus is God made flesh, but we think of Jesus as this being that is untouchable, that doesn't have feelings or emotions or any other human-like quality.
Yeah.
But we see this clearly. I mean, look at verse 9. Tell no one about the vision until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. To me, the tell no one is I don't want anyone to know about this. I want this to be kept a secret. I want it to be either a surprise or I'm scared.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I I also wonder sometimes when Jesus orders them to keep quiet, having more to do with the political danger that he's in his life, and that if
yeah.
these stories start to spread, it's actually putting him in even graver danger of his own life.
Hmm.
Um, but you bring up a good point that I think that we have really come to a place in Christianity where we dehumanize Jesus so
Hmm.
much,
Hmm.
that Jesus is not allowed to have any kind of feelings.
Hmm.
We have removed all of Jesus's feelings.
Yes.
He was this object. I really think that Jesus has become this object
Hmm.
of, sort of the scapegoat object. This, the scapegoat, what's the word, what atonement theory, that this is sort of like that his entire purpose is he is just kind of this lamb for the slaughter atonement theory. I think that that's
Hmm.
become the prominent image of Jesus in Christianity, whether people can recognize or use those words or not, to the
Right.
point where like it didn't matter what he said, it didn't matter who he was, it didn't matter what he felt.
Hmm.
His family, like there are parts of the Christian world that like say Jesus was an only child. Did you know
Hmm.
that?
I didn't. No, I'm not. And it's funny because I'm not even sure some of that like even crossed my mind
Well, I mean,
necessarily.
he's not like they
Right.
talk about his siblings. Like it doesn't, but there's just so many things that we removed Jesus so far away from being an actual like person.
Person. Yep.
Like I fully divine and incarnate person, but still a
Right.
person that would have,
Mhm.
felt things and done stuff, to the point that like I think that we've dehumanized Jesus to the point that it didn't matter who he was, what he said, how he felt, what his interests were, anything, that he
Mhm.
was just a pound of flesh.
Right. Well, and can you meaning humanity even comprehend that Jesus being angry or hungry or, having emotions about family members?
Well, I'm going to quote one of my seminary professors that said that like if none of that stuff mattered, the
Mhm.
gospels would be 2 chapters long,
That's a really good point.
right? Like it's the very very end of this story, at least for almost everybody except John, right? Is the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Right. Yeah.
Um that most of it is his life and what he
Hmm.
did and what he said, who he hung out with, where they hung
Hmm.
out,
Right.
where he started his ministry, who he was, like if none of that stuff mattered, why they wouldn't be included.
Right.
You know, just like I said here with this conversation with the disciples, like who told them that was Elijah and Moses?
Mhm.
Clearly there was some conversation, because then they're like, oh, well, we're going to be here for a while. Let's make tents, you know, like
Right.
so there, clearly that part of the conversation wasn't important. They didn't think people would have questions about that. Obviously they knew that
Right.
that's who that was, and this was their clear response.
Mhm.
Um, but you know, like these things are included for a reason.
Mhm. But how often, and it's interesting, how often do we stop and think about that and wrestle with that and even begin to
Yeah,
comprehend it, you know?
probably not. I really don't think it, you know, very often.
Hmm.
I even think from you know, some from like a pulpit standpoint, when we think about preaching, like we do often preach about the gospels.
Hmm.
Um but I even, again, like going back to seminary, you know, in if you there's this Lutheran preaching book. I don't know if you had to read it or not at LSTC, about the law and gospel, like old school preaching book, that there should always, you know, you're
Oh,
always pointing to the gospel, so it needs to come back to that gospel promise every time, which is, you know, this good news of, you know, the
mhm.
death and resurrection and salvation and stuff. That's the gospel.
Right.
So no matter what you're preaching on, that has to be sort of the at least this is, again, one particular book that I think was very commonly used in at least Lutheran seminaries for a long time, that it's like, even from a pulpit standpoint, no matter, like, we're always bringing it back to this one thing.
Hmm.
It's really important, I'll say that. And what else is important in this story, or in
Hmm.
any of the stories about Jesus?
Hmm. Yeah, context, that is the first word that comes to mind, of knowing the context of where was Jesus? What was the weather like? What,
Yeah.
buildings or structures were around? Um, I think oftentimes it's so like zoned in focused on what Jesus is or isn't doing, or how he is human or not human, that we forget to
Mm-hmm.
look at everything around it. Yeah, lost my train of thought on that one.
No, you're right. I think that that also digs into, so this you know, also why this transfiguration story could be extra alarming to the disciples, right? So like, to them, they know and love and spend all of their time with the very human Jesus, the
Hmm.
person that, you know, may get a little irritated at how dirty everyone's feet are, or I'm sure he got hangry every now and then. Who doesn't? They spend a lot of time on the road. I would get so hangry. You know, so
Hmm.
they spend all of their time with this very human Jesus.
Hmm.
So then to then all of a sudden be put in this place, and to have this amazing divine event happen.
Hmm.
You know, I could see how that could be, you know, sort of that could strike them with fear, right? To be put in the awe of the situation, of reminded, you know, the exact opposite, that wow, this really human guy is not just human. There's more going on here.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's almost like
I
the
was
disciples,
finishing your train of thought.
thank you, thank you. They were having almost the opposite experience of what a lot of us today experience. If we see Jesus as
Yeah.
this shiny, reverend, can do no wrong God in human flesh
Yeah.
form, but don't think of him as human. Whereas the disciples saw him hangry, saw him, walking with his feet in the dirt, and his clothes getting dirty and getting sunburnt and whatever. And then all of a sudden this outer body experience
Mm-hmm.
happens, and they don't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah.
You know, they get their socks knocked off. I don't even know if they wore socks, but the
They did
metaphorical
not.
socks got knocked off, and like they don't know what to do with it. I wouldn't know what to do with that. I wouldn't,
I also
I
think
would
that
still,
they could like potentially be hardcore fangirling right now.
oh yeah, for sure.
You know, like the
Yeah,
instant that they saw like Elijah and Moses, like those are their celebrities. They don't have very many. They're both there. Oh my
right.
gosh. Jesus knows those guys.
How can I get to know those people? How can
Yeah.
I, that, going back to what you said of they were, how do we, we get the tents and we have this and we're going to set them up a meal and and the nervous,
I don't
anxious,
know what to do with my hands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so, thinking about literally from this text, I think it's verse 5, the bright cloud overshadowed them. What was that like to see the cloud over them amongst all of the other things going on around them? First of all, for me, clouds are dark. Like, for example, our weather today is, I haven't seen the sun in a while, and clouds
well,
are
that's
dark.
Actually, when you had brought that up, it made me think of it too. Is sort of like, listen, if the weather changed so drastically, they went from like sunny clouds, all of a sudden there's a cloud, like I would be scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a tornado. Like, that's my assumption. Like, do we need to take cover?
Yeah, the apocalypse is coming, or we need to have
just a very real fear.
Yes, we need to have the tents because all of a sudden the sky is going to open and it's going to be downpouring or hailing or whatever else. Yeah. And I think it's a foreshadowing, not overshadowing of what's to come.
Very much foreshadowing, yeah. And it's also kind of placed in that right there in the story, like it's getting ready where they're getting ready to go into Jerusalem and start all that shindig, which is also appropriately where we place it in the church here. I also think that there is a reference sort of alluding to back to like why they're setting up these wanting to set up these dwelling places is, when Moses was on Mount Sinai, right? Like he was up there for 40 days. And so I think that they have, they're very familiar with that, right? So they have in their mindset, are we dwelling in this place with these people for a long time? And so just a really practical, like, we're going to be here for a while basking in this moment. So we need to set these up. So I can also imagine a little bit of like disappointment from the disciples when it's over so quickly, right? Like, so one of my favorite kids movies that I love and also is appropriately not super appropriate for kids is The Road to El Dorado.
Yes.
Where they come in and they're going into, I believe, sort of like a Mayan temple situation in Central America. And these people think that these two idiots from Spain are gods. And so they assume that they're going to dwell. They're like, well, we're expecting you to stay for 1,000 years. Right? That's what you would do as a god in this culture, is you come and dwell with your people for a while, right? That you dwell, you live among them before you ascend again. And so obviously not related to Mayan culture at all, but I believe that that's what the disciples were expecting, was a more of a dwelling.
And a hoping. They wanted the moment to last longer. They wanted to be to form community and not like have the whiplash moment that they had where all of a sudden it's over and
very, very different experience.
On top of that, they can't talk about it, or they've been told don't talk about it. And it's this moment that they want to sit and talk about it and, get other people's thoughts and expressions on, man, did you see that?
They just met their heroes. They want to geek out about it, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
I hope there was more to that conversation. Jesus was like, look, guys, listen, I need you to keep this under wraps for a while. Here's what's kind of going on. I don't really want the word to get out because I don't want people to get weird. And like, I hope that there was more to that conversation.
Yes. I'd like to think that there was. And, this is where we get to use our imagination of what actually happened in the conversation and, get to make up our own scenarios.
This has been fun. Thank you for diving into this fun topic with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It's fun to talk with other theologians and pastors and to hear their thoughts and opinions on it and chat about it.
I agree. That's why I really like doing this. This is my fun thing that I get to chat with people about. So that brings me to the next thing I always like to say is please share this for those of you that are listening that only listen to this purely because Pastor Kirsten was doing it and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna listen to it. I encourage you to listen to some other episodes and to share this with others. that this podcast can be just a nice light of, bring you a little bit of Bible study or joy, ray of conversation you can listen to on your commute or wherever. And check us out. So I'm working on building a resource page that will lead you to other fun books and stuff like that can help you continue your learnings. And go to our website at 10footpolepodcast.com, where you can kind of check that out, other episodes, as well as a blog and the podcast merchandise. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get updates with things, and to see the newest and latest episodes and other weird random things that I feel like posting, as well as every once in a while we're doing some Instagram giveaways, so fun things like that. But please, share this, and we appreciate you joining us in this ministry. And the 10-Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. You can learn more by going to demdsynod.org. Thanks, y'all. Take care.